I almost didn't go. That's the part I think about most. Tess had been after me for 2 weeks about that dress, a navy thing she'd found at a consignment shop on Delmar Street, the kind of store where the hangers squeak and everything smells faintly of cedar. She'd paid for it herself, out of her tutoring money, and she'd spent a Saturday afternoon taking in the waist with a needle and thread, the way her mother used to do. When she came downstairs that evening and turned around once in the kitchen light, I had to set my coffee down. "Don't," she said, reading my face. "I'm not doing anything. You're doing the thing." I was doing the thing where I look at her and see her mother so clearly it takes me a second to come back. I picked up my coffee. "You look like you own the place," I told her. She rolled her eyes, but she smiled. That was enough. The invitation had come through work. Vantage Meridian Logistics, the regional firm where I'd dispatched freight runs for 11 years, was hosting a client reception at the Alderton Hotel downtown. Annual affair. Black tie optional, which in practice meant the executives wore tuxedos and the working staff wore their one good blazer and hoped nobody looked too closely. My supervisor Carl had dropped the envelope on my desk with a shrug. "Bring someone," he said. "It looks better if everyone brings someone." I brought Tess. She was 15, but she carried herself like she was 40, the way serious kids do. So, honor roll, junior varsity debate, scholarship track for the state science program. Her mother had been the same way, a kind of quiet, focused dignity that made you feel slightly better about the world just by being near it. Tess all full of that and a sharpness of her own besides. We arrived a little after 7. The Alderton lobby was all marble and low lighting, the kind of room that costs money to look like it isn't trying. Waiters moved through with trays of things I couldn't name. A string quartet played something in the corner that everyone ignored. I got us 2 glasses of sparkling water and found a spot near the tall windows overlooking the street where we could watch the room without being in the middle of it. Tess looked at everything once, the way she does. A single slow scan, like she's filing it, and then she looked at me and said, "Carl really comes to these things voluntarily?" "Carl enjoys free shrimp." "Fair enough," she said, and that was the last thing either of us said about the room. It was going fine. Better than fine, actually. Tess had gotten into a conversation with one of the operations managers and his wife about the regional science competition, and she was holding her own the way she always did, unhurried and exact. I was standing a half step back, proud in the quiet way that doesn't need an audience. That's when Derek Holt came over. He was 26, maybe 27, Sandra Holt's son, brought onto the acquisitions team 6 months earlier, in the way that powerful muscles sometimes do, with a title that sounded earned, and a role that mostly consisted of standing in rooms and repeating things the analysts had already said. He had the easy confidence of someone who had never been asked to prove anything, and he wore it the way some men wear cologne, like they can't tell how much is too much. He looked at Tess, then he looked at me, then back at Tess, and he said, not quietly, not even pretending to be quiet, "Did someone bring their babysitter?" The operations manager's wife drew a breath. Tess went very still. I know that stillness. I've seen it her whole life. The way she goes quiet, not because she's hurt, but because she's deciding. Deciding whether the moment is worth her. Deciding what kind of person she wants to be in the next 10 seconds. She decided to be gracious. She turned back to the operations manager's wife and resumed exactly where she'd left off, as if Derek Holt had not spoken at all. I set my glass down on the nearest tray. Derek was already moving on, half turned away, already bored of his own joke. I stepped close enough that I didn't need to raise my voice, and I said 2 words to him. "We're leaving." He turned around, surprised that I was still there, surprised that the sentence had been aimed at him rather than at Tess. I held his eyes for just long enough, not angry, not threatening, just the way you look at someone when you want them to understand that you have seen exactly who they are and that you will not be forgetting it. Then I touched Tess's elbow and we walked to the elevator. She didn't say anything until we were outside, standing on the Alderton's front steps in the October cold waiting for the parking garage to bring my truck around. Then she said, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. I was handling it. I know you were." I looked at her. "That's not why I did it."
She was quiet for a moment.
Then she took my arm, just briefly, the way she does sometimes when she doesn't want to make a production of something. The truck came around. We went home. She had soup and I had coffee, and she told me about a project she was designing for the state competition, something involving water filtration and soil composition, and I listened to every word. I did not think about Vantage Meridian at all. I should explain something. My father built a company from a single flatbed truck and 40 years of early mornings. Raymond Callum Sr., out of Harlan County, who drove freight before I was born and kept driving it after, who built Callum Regional into a 7-state operation before he sold a controlling stake to Vantage Meridian in 2009 and retired to a porch in eastern Kentucky. When he died 3 years later, he left me what he'd kept, a 34% equity position in Vantage Meridian, quietly held, never advertised, administered by a trust attorney named Earl Pitts out of Columbus, who called me once a year to ask if I wanted to do anything about it. I never did. The money from the dividends went into a college account for Tess, and a savings account I barely touched. I worked dispatch because I liked the work, the routing problems, the rhythm of the yards, the way a well-run operation feels when everything moves the way it's supposed to. My father had taught me to love that. I wasn't going to stop loving it because I had paperwork that said I owned a piece of it. What I didn't know, until Carl told me the following morning, with a look on his face I'd never seen before, was that Vantage Meridian had been in acquisition talks for 4 months. A private equity group out of Cincinnati, Holton Bridge Capital, which Sandra Holt had run for 18 years, was buying the firm for a number north of $180 million. The deal was 90% done, except that it required unanimous equity holder approval. Earl Pitts had sent the signature packet to my house 3 weeks earlier. It was sitting on my kitchen counter under a bowl of Tess's apples, unopened, because I had assumed it was the annual dividend summary, and I'd planned to get to it on the weekend. Carl set a cup of coffee in front of me and said, "Ray, Sandra Holt has been calling the office since 6 this morning." I looked at him for a long moment. "What does she need?" "She needs," he said carefully, "your signature." Sandra Holt arrived at the dispatch yard at 11. I watched her come across the lot from my office window, a composed woman in her late 50s, dark coat, the kind of bearing that comes from 20 years of making decisions in rooms full of people who underestimated her. She walked past the freight bays without looking at them, which is how you could tell she'd built her whole life in boardrooms and not in yards. My father would have noticed the trailers. He always noticed the trailers. I met her at the door. She was professional. I'll give her that. She shook my hand without hesitation, looked me directly in the eye and said, "Mr. Callum, I owe you an apology." "Sit down," I said. We sat at the small table in my office, where I usually spread route maps. She had a leather portfolio. I had the signature packet, retrieved from under the apples that morning, opened and read for the first time over breakfast, while Tess ate cereal across from me and pretended not to notice that I was frowning at it. Sandra Holt told me about the deal, about what it meant for Vantage Meridian's employees, the benefits package, the pension commitments, the regional offices she intended to keep open rather than consolidate. She was thorough, she was honest. She was also, I noticed, careful not to say Derek's name. I let her finish. "What Derek did last night," I said, "has nothing to do with whether this is a good deal." She looked at me steadily. "No. And whether I sign has nothing to do with what he said either." A small pause. "Then what does it have to do with?" I picked up the signature packet, turned to the last page. The line was there. Raymond A. Callum II, 34%, with a little flag sticker that Earl's office had put on it, yellow and earnest. "My daughter," I said, "is going to apply to the state science program next spring. Full residential, 2 years, 40 kids selected from the whole region. The program has a scholarship endowment that covers room and board, but only for kids who clear a family income threshold that she doesn't clear." I set the packet down. "Vantage Meridian has a workforce development fund. It's been sitting underspersed for 3 years. I'd like a commitment, in the acquisition terms, binding, that the fund gets redirected to academic scholarships for employees' children. No income threshold, selection by merit." Sandra Holt looked at me for a long moment, not calculating. "Something more careful than that. Is your daughter going to win?" she asked. "I have no idea," I said. "That's not the point. The point is that the kids who should be in that room ought to be able to get into that room." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Derek called me this morning. He told me what he said." She folded her hands. "He also told me about the girl in the navy dress, that she didn't flinch, that she turned back to the conversation she'd been having, as if he wasn't worth the interruption." I didn't say anything. "He was embarrassed," Sandra said. "I think that was the first time in his life someone his own age made him feel that way." She paused. I'm not offering that as an excuse. I'm offering it because I think you should know that she left an impression. She usually does. Sandra Holt opened her portfolio and began writing. Not a note, an addendum to the acquisition terms, drafted by hand, which she slid across the table when she was done. I read it. The Workforce Development Fund, redirected to a merit scholarship program, binding on the acquiring entity, administered by an independent board. I read it twice. Then I picked up the pen Earl Pitts had clipped to the signature packet, a plain ballpoint, the kind I used to write route adjustments, and I signed where the yellow flag sticker told me to. She signed the addendum. We shook hands. At the door, she paused and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. 11 years," she said. "You've worked dispatch here for 11 years, knowing what you own. Why?" I thought about my father's flatbed truck, about the way a yard sounds at 5 in the morning when the first runs are, loading, the diesel and the cold air, and the sense of things moving that need to move. About Tess at the kitchen table with her science notebooks, the same focused quiet her mother had, the belief that the world is a problem worth solving. "Because it's good work," I said, "and I like being somewhere that makes sense." She nodded once, like that was the only answer that could have satisfied her, and walked back across the lot to her car. I stood in the doorway and watched her go. Then I went back to my desk, picked up the route adjustments I'd been working on before she arrived, and got back to it. Tess called at 3:15, walking home from school. "How was your day?" she asked. "Quiet," I said. "How was yours?" She told me about the filtration project, a new variable she'd thought of during chemistry, something about mineral content and absorption rates. I listened to every word, the same as always. I didn't tell her about the scholarship addendum, not yet. Some things you save for the right moment. A kitchen table, a bowl of soup, an October evening when the light comes in at a low angle and makes everything look like it was made to last. There's no hurry. The right moment always comes. And when it does, I'll tell her. The room has to have the right people in it. Her mother believed that. My father built a company on it. And whatever it cost me to make sure of it, it cost me exactly nothing. We're leaving, 2 words. And the deal was already done.